Next up, we have Jose Rotondo, who from Corteva, who will talk to us next.
There you go. Thank you. Okay, awesome. Thank you. No, I think I'm okay. So good morning, everyone. Do you hear me well in the back? Perfect. All right. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation. I am here representing a large group of of people, including breeders. I'm not the breeder. But today I will be talking about innovative cropping system and should be bred for novel traits and environment. The idea here is not to present a lot of data, but to discuss some of the ideas we are exploring in the company in this space. This is kind of a work in progress. So basically it's to discuss some ideas. And so let's start with some background discussion. So one thing is that cropping systems change over time, right? They are not fixed entities, so they evolve. And there are many examples in the world about changes in cropping systems. And cropping systems I define here in the way that we grow our crops. So here is an example from maize in Brazil. So on the y-axis here we have millions of hectares in maize production in Brazil, and here we have years. And this is a statistic that we have until 2016. And what you can see here is that almost 70% of 11 million hectares of maize today is grown as a second crop, maize as a second crop. This is a crop that is planted after soybeans in the months of January. And around 30% of that crop is planted as a first crop. So after a fallow in September. So there are two different cropping systems, and you can see that most of the corn today is planted like that. The question here is, has been this way the whole time? And the answer is, of course, no. So if you take a look to the 80s or the 90s, most of the corn was planted as first crop, and there was almost nothing as a second crop. So this is just to show you an example of how cropping system may change over time, of how the environment that we expose the crop to change over time. Another example is the use of cover crops. So in this case, on the y-axis here, we have the percentage of acreage that is using fall cover crops in different summer crops over the year. And you can see these are data from the USDA. And you can see corn, there is an increased tendency. So in the 2000, less than 1% of the corn was growing in a fall cover crop. But now it's almost 8%, cotton 20%, soybean 7%. So this is just another example to show that the environment where we expose our crops in early years may be different than today. So that's what I meant in terms of new environment. So we are exposing the crops to new environment. So basically the concept or the focus of this project is, okay, how can we select hybrids or varieties that are better suited to work better or perform better in this type of novel, if you will, environment. So when thinking on this type of cropping system, for example, having cover crops, we need to be aware that this cropping system provide additional ecosystem services beyond food production or yield. And again, this is an example of the literature where you can see we have food production here, which is basically yield, is our economic yield. But there are many other ecosystem services that those systems are providing. And here we have a comparison of two. Again, this is an example from the literature, but I want to show you that the comparison of a cropping system with cover crop and a cropping system without a cover crop. And you can see for some of the metrics, the cover crop provides more biomass. It can provide nitrogen supply if it's a legume. It can provide more nitrate retention, more soil health, if you will, or beneficial insects. Basically here, I want to show you an example of the additional metrics that we need to take into account when thinking in terms of these systems. And The evaluation of performance in this system, where we have a main crop that we harvest and we have a cover crop, is more complicated, right? We have to provide an ecosystem services while we produce also food. And I think that, again, this is some data from the literature, but I think that this plot is really interesting to show how our mindset in terms of evaluating this system should be focused on. And on the, it's a complex graph here, but on the y-axis, on the x-axis here, we have the relative yield on a cover crop relative to a control without a cover crop. So this is the economic metric. And here we have the ecosystem services. So we have the nitrous oxide emission on the cover crop relative to the nitrous oxide emission without the cover crop. And what's interesting here is that there might be different situations where we would like to be and some situations where we don't want to be. So here, this is the ideal situation, right? Where we have, in this case, a maize crop that yield the same or more in cover crop compared to yield. And also we have a reduction in nitrous oxide emission. So that would be the ideal situation where we have a hybrid that responds very well to cover crop condition, but also the cover crop is providing a service to the environment. There might be a situation where, again, we have more yield on the maize, but there is some increase in the nitrous oxide emission, but still we are in a good spot, because if you consider the amount of emission per unit of grain produced is reduced. So the footprint here is lower. Here we have an uncertainty. So we have a yield penalty, but still we have an ecosystem services. So where we are in this spot will depend on the monetization on that ecosystem services. And this is a spot where we don't want to be. So we have a cash crop that yield less in that cover crop, and also we have more emissions. So that's a space that we don't want to explore. But this is just to show you a concept or an idea on how we should look at this dual type of systems. So in terms of Corteva, and given this background, there are some goals that we have as an organization. So the first is to start exploring these ecosystem services and how can we improve those metrics in terms of carbon sequestration, nitrogen, and water quality. We would like also to focus on high quality protein markets. Another very important area that we are exploring is agricultural intensification in terms of double crops and intercropping, that will have a strong impact on sustainability. And also we will focus on some output rates. So to attain those goals, we focus on four strategy pillars, if you will. So the first one, of course, is using Corteva's existing breeding capabilities and testing capabilities that will help us to advance in this space. A second one is very critical also for us, is to develop partnership with universities and other organizations for germplasm and funding. I'm going to show you an example of that, of a collaboration with Iowa State. Another part very important is, in some cases we don't do the breeding directly, we rely on collaborators, but we are always doing research on the system. How can we grow those crops in terms of agronomy, crop rotation, and how can we measure those ecosystem services? And last, also, we consider a possible market for new crops and systems. So far, this has been some background information where this project stands and what are our goals. And now we're going to give you some examples or focus areas that we are currently exploring. So some of the priority areas, as I mentioned before, is yellow peas as a key ingredient for protein-based food. And in this space, we are doing breeding in collaboration with Montana State University. The breeding is doing by that university. We are collaborating with them. And for us, the target is how can we use winter peas as a double crop system with soybean and maize in the Midwest. So basically, it's how can we improve the sustainability of our crops here by using these winter peas. And again, breeding is being being done or led by Montana State, and we are doing a lot of testing of these ideas of having a double crop system here in the Midwest. Another area of interest for us is winter peas as nitrogen source for maize. And we have been conducting a lot of research to understand how is the amount of nitrogen this legume in a winter crop can provide to the following crop. And we are finding out that the amount of nitrogen is large, so we can start saving a lot of industrial nitrogen applied to the crop. We are developing an internal pea crop growth model to understand or try to predict how much nitrogen was added to the crop to the following maize crop. And this is a really interesting area that we are exploring to enable more sustainable production of maize in this region. So far I have been talking about cover crops, annual cover crops. We are also doing some work with Iowa State and the Land Institute. There has been a huge grant to this project that basically is to understand how maize interact with perennial ground cover. And the concept of the ground cover, of a perennial ground cover is that it relies on species complementarity. So you have a perennial ground cover with shallow roots. We had a maize or a soybean with deep roots, and we try to find out what is the best combination of those two. So this is a really interesting project, and the Corteva side is to understand, okay, what are the hybrids that perform better in those perennial cover crop systems. So far, these are some of the focus areas that we are exploring currently. Also, we are exploring double crops, novel cropping systems in terms of double crops, and the question here is what are the opportunities for agricultural intensification in the southeast US. Basically, this is a model-based analysis where we are exploring the hypothesis that the farmer profits and sustainability is not fully realized in those regions because underutilization of light, water, and nitrogen. And basically, this is for a site in Mississippi. And I won't enter in a lot of detail here, but this is maize biomass evolution. And you can see that there is a lot of, a large season that is underused. So still you have high temperature, you have a lot of radiation, a lot of water, and there is nothing there. So the concept is, this cropping system was never tested in that area. So we are using a crop model to understand, okay, is this something feasible? What is the risk of doing this in that region? So this is something that you can do pre-breeding, right? To understand, okay, is this a feasible system or not? And so basically what this allows to test in silico is what are the combinations. So basically this is a summer double crop. You have maize and soybean. What is the best combination of maturities of maize and what is the best combination of maturities of soybean for this double crop? Again, this is something that you can do an experiment. You can have 1-2 years of experiment, but using a crop model, for example, we can run 30 years of weather conditions to understand what is the risk of this novel trait. Again, this is something that we can do before doing any breeding for this novel trait. And on the y-axis here, we have the percentage of let me go back. So here, the numbers here show the land equivalent ratio. This is a number that is above 1 means that the double crop yield better than the individual crops. And here is just a summary of the result where we have different corn relative maturity here, and we have the soybean relative maturity here, and you can see that there are some situations where the single crop yield better, but we were able to identify some combination of soybean maturities and corn maturity that yield better than the single crops. And again, using the model and 30 years of data, we can test what is the percentage of success. If this is a system that is likely to succeed or not in the south. Again, this is something that we do in a model before doing any breeding. But at least now we know, okay, if we use this combination of corn relative maturity and maturity group soybean, we have a high chance of success. So we can start doing breeding in that space of adaptability. So some conclusions here to close. So I think that this is a take-home message. It may be pretty obvious, but I think that we should be aware that cropping systems are not fixed, and as they evolve, breeding needs may change. The second one is that if we think on this cropping system, including other components, the complexity of the performance metrics increase. So we need more, we have more complexity in how we measure the success of those systems. The working hypothesis of this project is that hybrid for current cropping systems may perform differently in novel cropping systems, including annual cover crop, perennial ground cover. So that's something that we are exploring in this project. Another message that I would like to share here is that the use of crop model for in silico testing might be useful to test novel cropping system before any empirical evaluation. And finally, the cropping system targeted for breeding must be of major significance, of course. They need to cover large area and be sufficiently unique to justify a separate program for breeding. With that, I would like again to thank you for the invitation, and I'd be open for questions. Thank you.